Hey there, and welcome to Series 3 of the Figuring Things Out podcast. I'm your host, Will Brown. Our third series explores the topic of creativity. What exactly is it? How does one curate it, make time for it, or even sustain it? Can you teach creativity? Are we born creative? How to get out of your own way? And much, much more. We hear from our own guests' experiences, their life stories, and their advice and ideas on creativity. There is a ton of gold in this series. We must say a huge thank you to our patroons who continually support us in this project. They help us with creative input, such as topic suggestions, questions to ask, and even guest requests. If you'd like to become a patroon and get involved with the podcast, please visit Figuring Things Out Podcast via Patreon. In doing so, you'll allow us to keep making these conversations and support us in keeping it ad-free. In episode 3, we had a great conversation with David Johnston of Accept and Proceed. He came into the conversation with a list of randomly selected words, and we tried to creatively add them into the conversation. We both really enjoyed this, and I decided to take it forward and put it into episode 4 and episode 5. We'd love to keep this going as it's a really lovely addition of chaos, volatility, but also intrigue. It keeps me on my toes, and therefore the conversation has a little bit extra. Please let us know in the comments if you like or dislike this, and if you have any more ideas. Thanks for listening, and now, on to today's guest. Enjoy the conversation. Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Figuring Things Out podcast. I am very pleased to announce that I have Soischi Porchetta with me this evening, or this morning. What's also very exciting for me is that she's actually from the future right now. So I believe it's the 15th of December where she is in Tasmania. And it's the 14th of December here for me, which is super cool. Soischi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's great to meet you across time.
Yeah, definitely. You're making me very jealous. I believe it's summer over there, right?
It is, although I live in Tasmania, which means that every season has every season within it.
Wow. All I can see right now is sunshine through that window, and it's making me very jealous. So as I was saying before we came on air, I'd love to ask the first question as a presentation of yourself and really just know, who is Soischi and what are you doing right now?
So Soischi in this moment feels like a young woman who's finally entering full adulthood in my own kind of perception. And it's not so much a physical age. I'm 37, but an age of integrating with society and becoming a fuller human that kind of is getting to know themselves and their purpose in this world. And a large part of that purpose for me is service. So I've kind of found over, 12, 15, less than 20 years ago, found something I was passionate about. And in that, which was different forms of physical practice, I developed skills of different sorts. So these skills, I could say, became a kind of gift, so that at where I'm at now, I have something to offer. So I don't just want to serve, but not know how to serve. But I go, oh, well, this is what I've cultivated, and this is how I can kind of pay it forward. Not pay it back necessarily to all the beautiful teachers and training partners and inspirations I've had, although I always hold a gratitude in my heart for them, but really to see like, oh, well, this stuff has helped me to have a more joyful life. And I feel that I don't know if it's I'm more sensitive to it or it's a different era. But there's a lot of suffering in the world and chaos. And while it's really intense, I don't think it's new. I think if we look back throughout any time in history, there would be mostly eras of war and disease and disharmony and chaos and competition. But as I'm here now, my purpose and my wish is to contribute whatever little gifts I have cultivated and been blessed with, and kind of share them with others so that they can empower themselves and not be subject to just the harsh karma of the world. So I do that through teaching movement. I've been teaching for around 12 years. I started with teaching Thai boxing, which was my main sport for several years. And then I became a personal trainer and I learned how to train people. That was maybe the shortest chapter for me because I knew it would not be stimulating for the long term, even though I went into the industry very green from that aspect. Yeah, and within 2 years, I felt I had learned it and I was needing something. It didn't have, I guess today's topic would be like creativity, right? So I was like, okay, there's no creativity here. I need something else. So then I met Ido Portal and I was very lucky. I got to study with him in person for over 5 years. And I changed over time. When I hit 30, I had this huge identity crisis and I didn't have the same desires or passions. Like it was almost like an overnight thing, which was so strange. Like I went from being obsessed with what I was doing to feeling almost like, if you have like your favorite pudding or your favorite snack and you've just eaten like 20 bags of it, you no longer like it. Like you actually hate it by then. So that's what like physical practice started to feel like for me. So I decided that I need to figure things out like on my own, and yay.
I'm cheering in the background.
Yeah, that was spontaneous, by the way, but I'm pretty pleased. And in that came much suffering, which was the best thing ever, because in kind of dissolving and killing off all the aspects of myself that were not serving me and definitely not serving others, I got to kind of rediscover, like who is Soischi and what does she want? And actually one thing that really helped me or pushed me to make that really difficult decision, because when I had been training with Ido, that community was my like main support network. It was my family essentially. And I knew that when I decided I had to leave, that I would be overnight losing everything, not just my practice or my teacher. But I remembered feeling that I was questioning that what drew me in was one of the ideas was a freedom, right? And improvisation. And I had been practicing so hard, like 6 days a week, 6 hours a day, for like 5 years. And I remember asking, I was like, when can I improvise? Like, I don't need to be great, but I want to feel this. I want to be allowed to improvise. And like that day never came. And I saw all these teenagers that may sometimes pop into my class, or people who were they appeared kind of random and they were so free with their movement and they could create stuff and enjoy moving their bodies without self-consciousness. And I would be baffled. I was like, wow, like I've developed all these skills and I'm so self-conscious. Like I would rather move in a really, culturally unglorified way or hideous way, but it's mine and I enjoy it, than to have all this perfect polished movement that is praised and get liked by everyone, but I'm not actually feeling, I'm just imitating mechanically. So that journey, I thought, okay, it'll be tough for a few weeks, and then, I'll figure it out and I'll be free, right? Freedom. Little did I know that without a support network, you don't get very far. So fast forward like 4.5 years later. In the meantime, I did start to study with Josef, who's the fighting monkey teacher. So if anyone doesn't know, they're based in Europe. They're awesome movement teachers that really emphasize creativity, creative problem solving, community, collaboration, all of these qualities that really resonate with me. But I also really appreciated the style of teaching, which was completely different. Josef would say, like, don't come to me all the time. Think for yourself, or be like a stray dog. You come, you eat, but then off you go, and you're self-reliant. And so that was really hard, but it was exactly what I needed and wanted. And and at the same time, I also sought out a meditation teacher. So I developed a daily meditation practice. And for a short while, maybe a year and a half or so, I was really in this kind of state where I thought, oh, well, meditation's really important. The body is just this rotting piece of flesh that I'm going to be like discarding anyway. So who cares about like movement or any of this? So I went completely the other way. And then over time, I saw that my life became unbalanced in a different way. And even when I moved to Tasmania just at the start of this year, I felt very physically weak for my own abilities. Like, I'm relatively strong as a individual person. And I saw the body as a metaphor for the internal state, and like needing to integrate the different practices to find a balance. And when I teach, just spontaneously, the internal practices and processes, they just come out even when we're doing a movement practice. And then when I work with meditators, I try to really push them, like, go lift some weights, do some like simple, hard movement, or like run up a hill or something, because otherwise you don't really embody those qualities. Like they're like not actualized concepts. So they stay as, they're not embodied, right? Or not fully embodied. And both are needed. So the internal practice, I think, is still more, if I have to give an importance, I would still put it a bit higher than the movement practice. One, because everyone can do it. You could be in a wheelchair or very old and bedridden, and you can have the internal practice, and it will apply to your daily life. For example, you having dinner with a difficult person or someone that triggers you, and you can use those processes. Whereas I think if you just have an ice bath or lift heavy weights, you may not be able to tap into that. Maybe it's a different kind of flexibility you need for that kind of emotional trigger with the at the family dinner or whatever it is. Yeah. So yeah, I guess, like, long story short, I mean, there's so many elements. Soischi is here to develop herself, to work towards her subjective freedom, physically and inwardly, and to share as much of those gifts as is available with others. I think that's kind of, you could say at this point in time, who Soischi is.
Beautiful. There's so many things I want to ask. I think what I will draw attention to first is the Thai boxing. This stands out to me as something quite interesting. Were you doing this competitively?
Yeah.
And how does one get into Thai boxing?
I think it's no different to getting into anything. The opportunity presents itself and you give it a go, and then it either hooks you or it doesn't. Like I've tried, I'd say like Thai boxing was my second big love. I did love Thailand. I went and learned the language and cooking and everything like I could. No, but I'd say my second big love, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was my first one, and I changed sport because I had discovered that I really, really wanted to compete. So I was in my late teens, early 20s, and it just came out of nowhere. Like I felt as a child, I was quite a wussy, and, you know, I was like clingy to my parents and afraid of everything and so clumsy, and like would hide in the toilet when it came to PE class. But when I discovered martial arts, it just switched something on in me that I wanted to, I think like in hindsight, like looking back from now, I wanted to fight to compete, like eliminate the aspects of myself that were very limiting. Because pre-competition, which I think any athlete in any sport, they like, you know, the psychological component, preparing for competition, even if it's not a competition, a performance, you go on stage, there'll be like certain processes that need to happen. But I had this like crazy hunger and fire to compete, and I struggled to actually like strike another person. So I would always try to land good shots, but I felt horrible when I would succeed. And I was like, oh, this is so unhelpful. Like I have to override this. Like I'd be like muttering, I'm so sorry. And then I'd keep going. And I think that was just like a lack of experience, because over time it just maturity developed where there was this understanding that even though we are competing and literally smashing each other, it's actually a collaborative dance. Because if I want to become the best Thai boxer that Soischi can be, I need that person to, you know, push me to that edge. There's no way I can do it with my trainer on the pads, with the bag, or I can look great shadow boxing or whatever, but that person who's there to not make you succeed is the one that makes you great. And you do that for them as well. So whether like you win or lose, that's, for me, that was always a little bit of a, like a side effect. It wasn't why I competed, which was not a great mindset, I think, for an athlete. Like once you get to higher level, I think it's important to really want to win as well as just want to have fun. So how did I get into Thai boxing? I was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I really wanted to compete, but this was over 15 years ago, and there were very few females at the time competing. And I also, I'm a small person. I weigh 50 kilos. Wow. And at the time, I probably weighed 45 kilos. So in Asia, it was better. Southeast Asia has more petite people. But even then, like there were so few people, and you have to like fly to a foreign country, pay the competition fee, enter, and maybe you would have like two people to compete with. One is 20 kilos heavier than you. Another one is a lower ranking belt. And, you know, you go like, do you take a medal or compete? And I'd always pick to compete. Like, I don't care who it is. I will just compete. But it was so limited and unsustainable as a student. I couldn't just fly around the world, entering these competitions, hoping to find an opponent. So I was going to Thai boxing once a week with my girlfriends. So none of them wanted to have a sweaty leg in their mouth or whatever it was I was doing in jiu-jitsu and wear those, boofy gis. So my girlfriends were doing Thai boxing and a couple of them became they started competing. And I was quite good at it and I liked it. But it was not my first love. I was like, I'm a jiu-jitsu competitor and for hobby, I do Thai boxing. But one day the gym boss said, oh, they're looking for someone your weight. Do you want to try a match? And I was like, oh, yeah, why not? I'll just switch the ratio. I'll do Thai boxing 5 times a week, jiu-jitsu 1 time a week and see if I like it. And I did very well on my first fight and I won. And I really enjoyed it, but I was still kind of thinking, I wish I could have this in jiu-jitsu. Like this was nice, but I like my old sport. But it's like, you know what? I've only done 1 match. Like, let me just give it more of a chance. And because if I have more opportunities, like in Thai boxing, they pay you to fight. You don't pay to fight. And this means that realistically, by the time you fight, you break even, right? Because you're eating more expensive food, you're doing personal training with your coach. So it meant that rather than pay to fight, you would at least sustain to fight. So I just picked the sport that let me compete. They had more opponents, more frequent matches, more local matches. And yeah, I loved it. So I just ended up dropping jiu-jitsu and pursuing the sport that let me really grow very quickly. And I say quickly, I think, because I had that obsessive attitude that a lot of young athletes have, was like I was just at the gym all the time or commuting an hour and a half each way. I was like, oh, I'll just read my uni books while I'm on the bus and on the ferry. And so I was really it just aligned well.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick note. This podcast is a self-funded project and we're trying our best to keep it ad-free. If you're enjoying the conversations and would like to support us, please feel free to do so for the price of a coffee via Patreon. You can also share it with your friends as it really helps us to grow. For any coaching, courses and event offers, please visit our website www.figuringthingsout.com. For now, back to the podcast. I'm interested, you mentioned, maybe this is a step too far, but you mentioned that you were quite a shy child. And then you jumped into BJJ, Jiu-Jitsu. And I want to know the link. What captured this shy girl into this quite competitive, physical, submission-based sport? Can you think about what that was?
Yeah. Yes, I have reflected so much on all the steps of the journey and their significance and influence. My first exposure to a strong physical practice was actually gymnastics when I was 9. But I only did that for 1 year. So we moved countries every 2 years roughly. So I was generally unable to continue what I had found once we would move. Like we were in different parts of Africa, then Europe, then Asia. And so it wouldn't just be like moving a few kilometers away. It'd be a big, big change. And that, I think, what kind of sparked something in me to not be so avoidant of physical discomfort. And also emotional. I guess I felt very inadequate and self-conscious Like I was so stiff, and if I ran, I'd get a stitch. Like it was pretty shocking. And I had no strength. But when I went to gymnastics, I saw these like girls a little bit older than me doing really fantastic, like inspiring looking movements. And I was like, wow, like I didn't care if I couldn't catch a ball, but I wanted to do what they were doing. I thought it was really cool. And the coach I had was the first person or the first teacher I had ever come across that believed that I could do something. Like he saw me in my stiff and weak state and said, you will achieve great things. And that was all I needed. I think I had never received that before. So I think a part of me wanted to kind of like please him or show the world, like, yes, I'm not useless. Like, look, I'm going to do something great. So for a year, I was doing three-hour sessions a week when I was 9. Of gymnastics and doing some little competitions. And then once we moved country, I was pretty attached to the coach, and like I tried so many other schools, and I was like, I'd rather do nothing than, this kind of more commercial type classes. So I stopped everything until I was 15. And my dad was doing Tai Chi at the time. And he said that the young people in his gym were doing wushu, and I may like it. It's a little bit gymnastic-y, and I've not done anything. I'm just like a lazy teenager. So he brought me with him, and I tried it, and that just sparked like instantly, like within the first class. And I was so hungry. So anything the coach said, I would do at home, extra homework, and go back. And again, progressed very quickly and moved country, and there was not the same thing. But actually in Brighton, that was the next country, I went to this like hybrid type Kung Fu class called Wu Ji Chuan. And I don't believe there's an actual lineage. It was a Malaysian teacher who had left behind some students, and I joined them. And it was really interesting because they were doing striking, takedown, and grappling. And this is like when UFC and Pride were quite new as well. So I was like, I never thought about like grappling, but I really liked the sensation. It felt very natural and very primal. And I think that may come back to my childhood, even though I was very, I was not a confident child. I grew up in different parts of Africa. So I was very much exposed to nature and animals. And I liked touch, like with trees, with animals, with my parents, or, I like whatever was around. So, yeah, I think that like body stuff really felt, I was like, yeah, this is just, I don't even need to think so much about it. And after moving from England to Hong Kong, my partner at the time, he was doing jiu-jitsu. So I was like, okay, well, I'll join you for this thing. I really don't like the look of this funny gi stuff, but whatever. If it looks like, there could be something there. And that's when I discovered the love of competition.
What do you think? You spoke very highly of this early gymnastic coach. Can you pinpoint what was so special about the way he or she was sharing with you?
He himself was retired. He was older, like 50s or 60s. From a 9-year-old, I think you could be 40 and look old, but I think he was actually older. And
he was actually 26.
Maybe, no, I'm pretty sure he wasn't. he had been accomplished himself, and his students did very beautiful work, and he was very strict. And the strictness kind of gave me the impression that he cared in a way that, like, the PE teachers I felt their strictness felt, in my perception, like critical or condescending or judgmental, whereas his strictness was like, I want the best out of you. And I believe that you can match that. So I think the difference was he believed that people could do good things. And he was also very realistic, I think, because he had trained at a high level. I remember one day he had us lined up, like it was so regimented. Gymnastics is so like rigid and linear. So we're all in a straight line with the toes pointed and the upright posture. And there was one younger than me. She was really tiny and she was brilliant. And he was walking like a guest or an ex-gymnast through the gym and introducing the different students. And then he pointed her out saying like, yeah, she's like fantastic. And some of them he didn't say too much about. So I don't imagine they would have felt too happy. And then he kind of walked past me and I was like, oh, he didn't say anything about me. But then he came back and he goes, oh, this one, she's new, but she has untapped gold inside of her. And that was like, again, I was like, oh, yes, he saw it.
Yeah, I've been seen. I find it so interesting how teachers or people in a certain role can really stick to us in weird ways, related to unknown things inside of us. I remember I had some horrible coaches when I was playing football at school, and one amazing one, and I can't really understand why, other than he was a bit like my granddad. And this is such a lovely thing. He was such a caring and driven, passionate person. And I only had him for one season, and then it was boop, on to the next one. It's so interesting. Yeah.
It is. I suppose like one thing that really popped out for me, because I have reflected, I've attracted like many different, not many, but some really wonderful teachers with incredible strengths in different ways. And I've reflected on like, how come I invited this into my life, or it aligned, right? I've been very blessed with like the best teachers in the world in most of the disciplines I've done. Somehow that's like a stroke of luck that I've had. But not all of them were like fully conscious people. Like they may not behave in ways that I would today feel is responsible or caring. And but I reflected on different parts. Like some teachers I've had have embodied the qualities. Like you mentioned, this teacher reminded you of your grandpa. So some of the teachers I've had have embodied the positive qualities that I was seeking and wasn't getting from elsewhere in my life, but also the negative qualities that I was very familiar with from unhealthy family dynamics. So I think subconsciously I was that was familiar, and there's no way that you can consciously know that when you meet a stranger. But yeah, after spending a few years with some of them, I noticed like, oh, like they're very controlling, like this parent may have been, or they're very, whatever, like not positive aspects that I would feel kind of trapped by or unhappy about. I was like, oh, I've basically invited in this aspect that I think is there to help me to fully overcome it. Not just because I worked on it within my family dynamic or within maybe early relationships with inappropriate partners or whatever it was. I was like, oh, it's hidden in also this relationship. So it's on me to like see within myself, how come I still invited this back in and didn't detect it until like so much time had gone by. So there was this feeling of needing to internally transcend some of my own limitations that I was familiar with in childhood, and also seeking family. I think that was something that I did not realize how much I missed, because we moved countries every 2 years and my parents separated when I was 10. At 7, I did like a year and a half of boarding school in Kenya. So there were all these things that I was used to, and I was mostly okay with, because I knew that I would make new friends in the new place, and that the new place would offer different kinds of, enjoyment and beauty and safety. But I think I was really craving like some kind of home. And when I found martial arts, that gave that, right? You have like the teacher is a bit like a parent's role, which is a bit how I see myself when I teach as well. Not like I'm parenting, but you're holding space for people to develop in a caring way. So I was really seeking that. And I think that largely eliminated a lot of teachers or communities, or if it was a commercial gym, I would not even like look at it, because I subconsciously I was searching for like brothers and sisters and parents and peers and competitors, and I see searching for that, and I think that's why I was so addicted to training. I thought I had endless energy, which I kind of did until my late 20s. But I think that actually gave me more energy, a feeling of belonging. Yeah.
Before, you were saying that you worked as a PT for a couple of years, but it was like a really short period of time. And then you found Ido Portal's work. What do you think was the main thing that caught you there?
I had again gone with a friend to one of his Movement X workshops. At the time, I had done, some kettlebell or like CrossFit and other type of, equipment or further education. And when I saw the price of his workshop, and also some of the things he was saying online, I was like, oh, I will never go to that. That's ridiculous. But one of my colleagues, I really respected and trusted him. He was like a retired rugby player from Scotland. And he's like, no, trust me. Like, it will really help you. Like, you're kind of lost, and I think it will align really well with you. So I was like, okay, I trust you, and let's go. So I went, and everything Ido was saying, and Odelia came with him, and everything she did, again, I was so inspired by how she could move, and she was quite quiet and soft, and his philosophy really resonated with me. And I was like, well, I think like this may be what I've been looking for. Like, I'm not ready to retire from fighting, because I was fighting professionally in Thai boxing at the time. But I really want to learn this. And for myself, I didn't even like consider about teaching it, because it felt so far away. I was like, I can have my day job of personal training, my development with this movement stuff, and then my like sport in Thai boxing. And it was, like I said, like I've been very lucky with teachers and timing. And I attended the workshop and I loved it. And I didn't find a lot of the things super challenging. I was like, oh, I can kind of do a bit of everything, because I was always cross training like as much as I could. And I was like, oh, well, this guy, like if I want to do online, first, I'm like, I hate online stuff. So I wouldn't even know how to like upload a video and send it to him. And second, it's very expensive, etc. So I was like, I think I'll just like, I just looked at my notes and practiced everything as best as I could. But I was like, I think that's the end. Like it was a very short affair with these people. But then I had just quit my job and I went to the salad bar down the road to get lunch. And Ido was there. He had popped in for like a meeting. He had popped back into Hong Kong. And I was like, oh, he's here. And I was like, super terrified because he's quite like, imposing, right? He's definitely like an alpha dog. So I was like, oh, I'm so scared of him, but I really have nothing to lose. So I'm just gonna go and ask him. And I said to him, hey, Ido, I'm Soischi. I don't know if you remember me. I attended your Movement X. And he's like, oh, I do. You're a Muay Thai girl. I remember. And I was like, oh, great. So I want to join your team. How do I do that? And he looked at me really surprised. And I was like, I'll do whatever it takes, and if you say no, it's fine, obviously. And he said like, oh, interesting. Okay, I'll give you a chance. You can train with Odelia for 3 months because she'll be here. It was just coincidence, again, that she had been placed there for a few months. Or you can train with her for some time because they didn't know it would only be 3 months at that point in time. And he said, people have asked and all of them have failed. I'll put you through the fire, but you'll never make it. And that was enough for me. I was like, oh my God, this guy does not know, like there's no way I'm going to fail. So so that just ignited it. But it was, again, like serendipitous events. There's no way I could have planned or even wanted that. Like it just happened.
Wow. And what was the fire? What did he put you through?
It was just training a lot. So I reduced my clients and made time, like whenever Odelia called, I would just be there to train twice a day for a few hours each time. And he gave me certain goals I had to hit, which they seemed impossible. But I was like, if this process apparently works and I put the work in, I don't see, like, we'll see what happens, right? So within 3 months, when she had to leave, Odelia had to go back to Europe. He said, show me what you've produced and I'll decide. Make me a video. And at that time, so after 3 months of training, I did a 30-second freestanding handstand. I had a 10-second tuck planche. I had ring routine. Like, actually, it's a crazy fast progress. Like, now that I've been teaching for a while, I'm like, oh, that's 3 months is quite ridiculous. As doing, I think, like an archer, like, yeah, pretty like crazy stuff. So he said, okay, you've passed, you're in. So I was like, oh, amazing. And yeah, I think just proving that I would do whatever I'm told, basically.
Wow, interesting. And then from that process, you then had 5 years or so of working within this format. And then you eventually, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let's say stagnated or moved to the next thing. And this was Fighting Monkey eventually? What was the jump from one to the other?
I had met Joseph from Fighting Monkey at the first movement camp that I attended of Ido's, which was in Singapore, I think 2013 or something like that. And when I met Joseph, it was so strange. Like, there was no feeling of, like, for any of my teachers, like no romance or attraction, but complete like commitment and loyalty. And when I met Joseph, I felt like, I feel like this is my teacher, but I already chose, almost like I already married, the other one. And I was kind of confused. I was like, something just feels right with this person. But then I instantly, like in the same stream of thought, realized that one day I will learn from Joseph. I don't know when, it could be many years from now, and just enjoy what he has to offer here and his company. And Ido is the perfect teacher for you right now because his personality was so difficult for me. And the way he approached training, that I need to be like in harmony with that before, picking what I really like, kind of thing. So I was like, I have so much to learn here beyond the physical practice. So Ido was the right teacher for me. And then I, over time, forgot about Joseph. Like, we kept in touch a bit, but like, because I was very close within Ido's team, you don't cross-train with anything, basically. So I just fully committed to that. And I thought, well, maybe it was just, I would have liked to train with Joseph one day, but I get so much from this. It's fine. You can wish him Merry Christmas each year or whatever, but that's about it. And when I felt like I completely plateaued, I developed a distaste for all the locomotion and mobility and strength. And I was just alone training in the park in Sydney. And I was like, this is not freedom. This is not joyful. And even the friends I had, they had to be doing the same hobby I had. It was so like a insular bubble. It was so unhealthy that I felt I stagnated as a person, not in my movement practice. And actually, the less I trained, the more gains I made, which I was like, oh, that's really odd. At the time, I thought. So when I decided to stop, I wrote to Joseph after maybe a few months, and he was coincidentally coming to Brisbane. I was like, oh, he's coming to Australia. Like, okay. So I went and attended his workshop, and it was so hard. It was different to how he presented at Ido's camp. I think he had softened a little bit for Ido's camp. And I was like, oh, this is like really tough, but I love it. And he would end at 4 p.m. and tell us to go and rest. And I was like, is this a trick? Like, there's like with Ido, we would have to train till 10 p.m. and, deserve a little bit of food and rest. Whereas Joseph is like, oh, don't train too hard. And I was like, maybe I should do some rings, or I was still like, surely he expects more from me. But he didn't. And he was like, what are you, stupid? Like, do you want to smash your nervous system? And tomorrow we have all of this brain stuff we're doing, like, go and rest, go to the beach. And I was like, oh my God, this is so foreign. And I signed up to, I did that workshop, some time passed by, and then I hosted him in Sydney the following year. And after that, I started online coaching, and then I went to Europe. And so it probably was like a couple of years where I didn't fully, I just did one workshop and thought about it for a bit.
Did you see a major difference in what or how he was sharing compared to the 2013 movement camp and the 2016-17 workshops?
I think the essence is probably the same and the foundations, but he is constantly evolving so much that I think that's why all the European students, they keep going back like a few times a year to his same workshops, because no workshop is the same. Like, the way he strings things together or pulls them apart or evolves them and takes in things he always invites other professionals to contribute. So the work is very alive. And I think I just didn't know that at the time. And the other part was I was also very different. Years had passed in between. So my perception of the experience was also quite different. I think when I first met him, I was so pumped. I had just met Ido and I was hungry. Whereas when I met him in Brisbane, I was kind of broken. I was having like injuries and like fatigue and identity crisis. So I think that would really influence my perception as well.
Interesting. Talking about an alive practice, I guess in a lot of ways, fighting monkeys is incredibly creative, both in the ideology, but also I think in what it demands of the people partaking in it. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. There is mimicking, but it's still, there's so much emphasis on how do you move as yourself? How do you sound as yourself? What do you do when you don't know what to do? So they keep making these games, these scenarios where you're playing, but you're essentially problem solving with no kind of books that you've read ahead of the game. And then the rules are always changing. And I think that really, it's totally a creative practice and a live practice. And no two people, even if they come from the same discipline, really express or figure it out in the same way. They will all be like, have that diversity.
How was it for you going from the work with Ida, which was quite well defined and put into very specific containers and contexts and moments, let's say, and skills, with very clearly defined achievements and pathways, to then moving to the fighting monkey style of working that was so open and so alive, as you say? Was there some kind of emotional layer that was troublesome?
Emotional layer that was troublesome? I would say so. I struggled heaps in the beginning with the coordinations, which is a slightly less creative because you are following something that someone else is doing. But that brought a lot of, like that childhood kind of like, oh, I suck or I can't do it in the very early months. And that it was beautiful to have that dissolve. Or it's like, oh, actually, like, it's great to, just fumble around and try to feel it out. And, but yeah, like there were definitely different stress responses. But I think some of the games are designed to simulate that, right? Like Joseph speaks about movement practice being a simulation, or practice being a simulation for life. So it's really good. Like he had us sometimes do math, which was like, oh my God, like that crippling anxiety of childhood again coming out. Like I'm going to look so foolish again, or I just can't do it. And so there would be those aspects. But also there was a big feeling of ease, like a big weight lifted off my chest, and a feeling of power and possibilities, because it's like, you don't need to get it right. You just need to start being yourself. And in that, like, kind of showed me like, okay, it's almost like a, space, right? There's no container, but within that, like, I wanted freedom. I wanted creativity. So now I'm being given the platform to like explore and move into them. So I'd say it feeling much more ease, and also not so much demand on, like, he talks so much about entropy, right? The law of thermodynamics, where we don't have infinite energy and we can burn it faster or slower. And understanding that, like, oh, I was shot because I had really been burning very fast. That also took a weight off, because it's like, oh, I don't need to dance beautifully within next month. Like, I can just take my time, and maybe when I'm 55, I'll be most joyful ballerina, and that'll be wonderful. Like, yeah. So I think initially some anxiety, but then quite quickly moving into like expansiveness and like, let's be present and work with what's there.
Would you say you're a creative person?
Yeah, I would. I wouldn't have said that until I would have said that as a child before high school. And I can say this now, but there were many chapters in between that I may not have been able to say that. And I think that innately we are all creative, but many of us will accumulate so many layers that really limit that ability to shine through. Yeah, I think being human or thriving as a human has to include creativity. I see, like, what does creativity mean for me is to be fully present and receptive in that moment and align with the natural flow of energy that is already there. So it's like, when I was fighting in the ring, that would be creative. There's no rehearsal. It's not a kata. You're fully present. There's this flow state, and what's there flows through, right? Regardless of how it goes. I see that with musical instrument. I got in recent years into pottery and then weaving, and just seeing, like, I may or may not have a concept of what I would like to produce. And I can just set about that intention, but I have to be fully present with what's there. Yeah, maybe the clay is a different texture or color, or it blows up in the kiln, or maybe, I want to weave this thing, but I don't have the technique yet. And I have to make something else, and seeing that finished product and accepting it for what it is rather than what it should be. No, we physically can give birth to other humans. We cook food. Like, I don't know, I think life is creativity, but it may not be felt when we become mechanical and monotonous, or when we try to just get it right because we've been told. Yeah.
Do you have any practices or things that you do to avoid becoming monotonous, and in turn find those ways of being creative?
Yeah. And I suppose they would fit in different, like, each play a slightly different role, or the practice is quite different. So meditation practice, that's not why I do it, but it's one of the many byproducts I noticed is when I make time and space to disassociate, to not from all my attachments and even my own thoughts, and just go in that space of a background witnesser. Then when I connect with that impersonal aspect of my personal self, it's impossible to be robotic. There's like a more detachment and space. so I think that's like one of the byproducts, because then I'm more present, right? And to be creative, we have to be present, but also inviting, I guess it's more from the inside out. It's not what I'm doing, but it's how I feel about it. If I see everything as a play, then when I'm doing dishes, then rather than it's okay, get it done and over with, it's like, can I enjoy feeling the squeaky texture, or like scratching that disgusting thing off the plate, or like more of that, not get it done and over with type approach. Obviously, it's not there all the time. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I didn't do the dishes and I gotta like just get them done. And then for training also, I have put back more structured, more strength training, because I feel like, hang on, when emotional energy is low, it's much easier to do familiar linear stuff and then feel like I want to feel solid in my body, so that when life throws its inevitable curveballs, I don't just feel like I'm calm because I meditate, but I'm like, that fighter is always going to be embodied within me. So while I have put back more linear and structured and like strength training, I also try to always have like a random training. Like, okay, let me just get this string and see what I do for 15 minutes, right? That way I've not just gone and done a robotic thing, or I'm going to play 3 songs and I'll just see what happens when I play those 3 songs. So I'll give myself like little opportunities for that to happen. And then when I teach, actually, that was a huge switch, is I don't, except for like strength training or some goal-oriented training, I don't use any program. So I always arrive and I'll check in with students, and I'll also observe what's the season, what's the climate, what time of day is it, and how are students looking, or why do they say they're feeling great when I can see they're not, or however it is, and then go from there. So the movement practice for us as a community is a creative process. They're not going to do what Soischi has determined would be good for them. We just go and see like, what could be good for us right now? How do we elevate our state and leave this room feeling like better than we arrived? And then week by week, like, build on that. So I see teaching as a creative practice, which initially I had like the program down to a T, super scientific, and it worked. And when I made myself switch that, when I was going through my identity crisis, I said, well, okay, I can't treat the students like robots and myself like a robot. It was so terrifying. I thought that I would not know how to teach. So I kind of weaned off of notes and programs. And now I kind of play with both. Sometimes you need a recipe book, and then often you just, if you've been cooking for 10 years, you just know how to cook. So yeah.
How much are rules, regulations, and routines useful for your creativity, and how much do you try and avoid them?
I think this probably changes over seasons for me. And I don't just mean like geographical seasons, but my own life context seasons. So if there's a lot of chaos and low energy and unpredictability in my life, I may put more structure to feel more balance. And if energy is high, then not much structure is needed, right? Things can flow and expand in all directions. But if energy is low, and energy can be physical, emotional, intellectual, then simplify, reduce, And so simplify, whether it's structure or not. I'd go more with simplification or expansiveness, I think.
Yeah, like removing roadblocks out of the way, make things as easy as possible, right?
Yeah. Because already energy is leaching and it's limited. So, okay, just like when I first moved to Tasmania, it was a really rough time. We had a very rough ending to our life in Canberra with my partner and we had this long road trip driving down, didn't know anyone here, and just like moved to the bottom of the planet pretty much. And energy was really low, like just, everything put together. So there was maybe not the bare minimum structure so that I can fulfill what's needed. Okay, go to work, unpack, clean, sleep, basics. And then adding in, okay, you need to do strength training. You can't feel like the wind's going to blow you away because you're so flimsy. It really goes by the seasons. And then once like I felt settled, then it's like, let me like explore the bush. Let me just get lost walking in this direction. And that's like a creative practice. That would be highly distressing if I did that on the second day since arriving, right? Like even going to the supermarket is like, I took the wrong turn. And so, I think like the context determines the ratios and what, and
How about judgment? How do you, let's say you've created this class, whether you've planned it or not, or you've done this dance or improvisation or whatever it may be, or this pot. At what point, if at all, do you judge the quality?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm sure that some aspect of me probably judges it throughout, like, to be honest. And then the more important part is like, how much do I feel is important and how much do I let go of that? And it's not like a communist attitude. So it will be different for each, like if someone's doing something, like if someone is new and they're in their lack of experience or not feeling like outgoing, then anything is going to be great, right? But if someone, I don't know, is like mentoring under me, then I may have like push them more. And then for myself also, I try to let go more because I can be extremely like on myself, the harshest and most critical, and seeing, okay, does this serve the overall quality or is it just old rubbish chatter that's like, not helping anything. So I think judgment kind of runs a little bit in the background. And then I have the other CEO who's like, no, you're like a bit out of place, like shush, or okay, let's like half of it was rubbish, but you can like make that smoother or improve the quality a little bit.
Yeah. I feel so similar. I feel like I really have to reserve judgment of myself so strongly, especially when I'm doing more dance-oriented works, things that are not so normal or natural for a large male that's grown up playing football and American football all his life. It's a really interesting thing to move down. And I'm reading right now The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. So it's a lovely book, and he talks a bit about space and different ways to be creative and how to judge creativity and if it's useful or not. And then he really talks about this ability that he had throughout his career as a music producer of really not caring about his own judgments of the work. If he felt that he was enjoying the process, the creation was meant to be there. And if he felt like it was worth sharing, that's it. whether it's amazing and people love it or everyone hates it was irrelevant to him, which I thought was really powerful. It's something that I don't think is so easy to have, this lack of judgment of something that you put out into the world, especially with social media these days. I think it's really, oof, the
It's
metrics
so
are so clear.
distorted. Yeah. Yeah. Like it's got, of course, pros and cons, like everything, but I really love that. And like for him to say that, it really shows that he's had so much experience cultivating this embodiment, right? He's gone through that process to be able to share it with, people like us who are just a few steps back on that same journey. I remember my first spiritual teacher. He was an artist, an art professor, and a shaman. And he always encouraged me to make art, and he would call it objective art. So he said most art is like negative art. The artist is trying to do self-therapy, maybe putting like political stuff down or trauma or whatever it is. But like objective art is always going to be positive because that's the nature of the universe. It's not denying negativity, but it's that pure expression of creativity, which is a life force flowing through you. And yeah, he was an incredible artist. I'll send you some of his works, like images of his works. He passed away last year. And I said to him, like, well, I don't know how to paint or draw. And he said, you don't need to know. You just take a Q-tip or a stick. And like, how did, the Australian Aboriginals, draw? And he's like, by the way, they are sharing maps of consciousness. It's not just little dots on a canvas. They're like landscapes of this incredible world that we live in. And he's like, just see what happens. Don't control, don't plan. What do you mean it need to look a certain way? And yeah, I pretty much I used a cherry pip and sticks and Q-tips and just got some paints and just went on this big journey, which is very meditative, and see like what comes out and what's reflected back. And you're like, well, I had no idea that this can come out. And that's with zero technique. He's like, do that. And then you can learn techniques after, to like the proportions and scale and color combo and lines and circles. But like, he's like, that's not art. Those are just techniques that help you with your art. Do the other one first. Which is similar to a fighting monkey style. It's like improvise first, and then, if you need and want to, you polish after.
Yeah. I think it's so important for anyone to engage in anything physical or maybe even not even physical, but to have that space to reserve judgment of quality and comparison. And first just do the thing to do the thing. And after time, choose whether you want to refine or not. I think that's so important for people to really engage truthfully. Otherwise, everything becomes comparative and negatively driven based upon, but he or she or they did this better. And it's like, so therefore I'm not the best. And
which is impossible, right? There will always be like, no matter who you are, maybe not now, but like a year later, or like, it's just impossible. And it's kind of unreal in a way. I think that comes a lot from the conditioning of this world that we live in. Like at school, we're graded, and even in the households, obviously you need like direction and discipline, and they're super important. But the whole like rewarding and punishing based on what the person in power is expecting is really drilled into us. to the point that it seeps into the subconscious mind, right? So even we as movement teachers who are trying to bring more joy and creativity to the students, we're like, oh, but there's still some layers that, like I'm working through to like embody that. How can I say like, don't be self-conscious, it's a safe space and we support you and you're beautiful, your movement is so beautiful, but then I don't like really embody that myself, right? I'd say like the judgment is kind of there most of the time, but it becomes mostly irrelevant. So it's just like a background noise. Like it's gonna be there. It's been drilled into this brain for decades. It's not just gonna disappear just because I know that it's not great. But it's like, do I give it more attention than it needs, or do I go, it's there, whatever. It's pretty meaningless.
I think it's so powerful for us competitive natured people, because by definition, competition is comparative. And we can't almost avoid that. Wow, yes, I'm gonna compete. I want to move a bit away from creativity for a moment, and I know we're running out of time, but I'm really intrigued by your recent sharing about teaching elderly populations. Can you explain a bit about where the ideas come from and what you're doing there?
Yeah, that it's such a dear like aspect of teaching for me. It just arose spontaneously while I was figuring things out. And I thought, like, who do I really like love to be around? And I love being around all kinds of people, but I really love being around not all, but a lot of older people. I think I have a lot to learn from them. And also looking at like teaching, working with different demographies, like everyone and anyone is welcome to come and learn with me and practice with me. But my human inclination will be more drawn to some people than others. So if someone's like, I suppose if someone wants to work on themselves holistically and is open to more questions than answers, then that's the perfect person. But also someone in need that it has those qualities. That's like the top candidate, like my favorite. If someone's kind of like, if they're very talented, they could probably get a better coach that will up them more if, in their sport or their skill sets. And if they kind of just want to like tick goals off, then usually that will not be like a long lasting relationship. But I feel that with elderly people, there's very little offered to them. Everything is kind of mechanical, right? So we give the pills and the physio and the sticks and walkers and wheelchairs, and maybe you bring the fluffy bunny to the nursing home, which I think is fantastic, but I don't think it's gonna fulfill you as a human being permanently. So I'm like, how come they don't get things that bring creativity and joy? And like, I believe that the best way to learn is through play. Like that's how you become a super athlete. That's how you become the greatest hunter in the forest. That's how you problem solve, because there's no way of not having creativity, interaction, communication, problem solving, being present, like vital things. So I remember I was in Canberra trying to, I had a small group at the place I was working at, and I was trying to expand it. So I was ringing up aged care facilities saying like, oh, would you want to try a free session? And then we can maybe come once a week and, give classes. And they would all say like, oh, we have physios or they have medication. I'm like, I don't offer that. Like, just try a free class. Like, what about joy? And there was just such a foreign concept. And I was like, wow, this is horrific. They're pretty much like broken machinery waiting to be, put in the earth, right? Like that's like the really miserable reality, I think, that is very unnecessary. And so I thought, well, okay, I love their company. I don't know how I can help them because I've just been like an athlete myself. This was earlier on, but I just want to work with them and let's see. So as I started teaching, I realized that although I was the teacher of the class, they were my teachers because they're actually the ones who helped me to permanently eliminate the dependency on a program because it does not work, right? I went to teach one of the classes and I think I had like a little bit of a program and I'm like, okay, and we have some new people, any health issues? And one's like pacemaker, fused spine, reconstructed knees. I'm an athlete. I'm totally healthy. Don't make me bored with elderly exercises. I have severe bipolar disorder. So I was like, oh, what the hell do I do so that everyone is safe? Everyone understands how to like practice together. They don't hurt themselves, but they also don't waste their time doing like geriatric kind of stuff. Like they're still, even if they have limitations and challenges, I really see like an innate intelligence and capacity to learn in everyone, like no matter who they are. So in that, I would say like, can we experiment? So now most classes, I would say, can we experiment? And we come up with amazing things. So I learned so much about anatomy, more than every book in the world, just from working with older people, more about aging and longevity and what could be waiting for me in the future. And initially I felt kind of hypocritical. I was like, oh, well, I'm 33 years old and you're 78 and I'm going to teach you how to age well. Like, I was like, who am I to, like, I need to be 89 to tell the 70 something year old. But yeah, it just kind of, they really became my teachers and helped me to just let go and not be so nervous or try to get a perfect job for teaching any class or even workshop. It's like, hang on, see who's there and how I can serve them, because that's my job. My job is not to impress them or even make them great and tell everyone else how great my students are because of my methodology. It's just to serve them. So they really taught me a lot. And there's so much joy. Like someone who's weak and then they get a muscle up, it's like a big celebration. But someone who has been like unable to like look at people in the eye because their spine has been fused down for the past 8 or 15 years. And then they can like suddenly like look at the birds and the cherries in the trees and then also go down and pick up their grandchild or not be afraid to get out of the bathtub. One lady, she did get stuck in the bathtub and she said, oh, now I know why you make us go down and up with those exercises that we hate. And like when that happens, it's just like their quality of life really went up. Like they didn't just feel happy that they did something strong. They really, their world changed, right? Because of the effort that they put into the practice.
Wow. That's really inspiring. It really makes me think that I want to work with elderly people too. I love my grandparents. I had a really nice moment a few years ago of my grandma. She lost the ability to stand up and down. And then I kind of helped her a little bit with this idea of where her head was and where her posture was, and maybe to work with physics rather than work against physics. And she was like, oh yeah, okay. And I came back a while later and she was like, look what I can do. And she's getting up and down from the chair. And she was so proud of herself. Oh. And now she goes to this class called the Use It or Lose It class, which is so cool. And these also elderly women share with other elderly women. Tai Chi
Yeah,
and stuff. It's so cool. It's
that's
an
so
inspiring thing.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's lovely to have a feeling of for you, I think, of your work being really meaningful and really impacting people's quality of life in such a palpable way.
Mm, absolutely. There's like a sense of duty also once there's that knowledge. And it's interesting you mentioned about your grandma going to these classes with women. So maybe that's your job now, well, among your many, many jobs. Like most of the older people, they're almost all women, and not just with me, but like other people across Australia I know who are doing classes for elderly. There's almost no elderly men coming in. And that's something I really want to like crack that code, not that they have to train this stuff, but I know they not all are sedentary. They may go and do some machines or a bit of dumbbell or cycling. But it's very interesting. Like
I
maybe we can
wonder.
discuss this in the future.
Yeah, really. I really wonder if it's a kind of resonance thing, both on the teacher but also on the content. And I
Mm,
think in that age bracket, if these people are 60 or 70 years old, where they grow up and the narratives that were around when they were growing up, I suppose that's quite a big stamp on them as a person.
hugely,
Yeah.
hugely.
I also think that people are really drawn to the person that's
Mm,
sharing and they resonate. We kind of brushed over this earlier in the conversation with how teachers affect or inspire us. And I really feel this in the process of my teaching over the last 10 years or so and how people have come to my sessions dependent on who I was as a person and how I was presenting myself as a person. The content plays a role, but I think more often than not, it's not only that, it's also back in the day I had almost all men because I was this
mm.
big macho guy, like in a vest all the time with muscles bulging. Over this big process, I've kind of softened quite a lot and more often than not, I'll have mostly women and in-person coaching, which is very interesting. Um, Having said that, when I think to my online coaching, it's all men. And through that means, it's very interesting to see that actually, whether I share differently on social media, maybe I don't know, maybe I'm seen differently on social media, maybe. But yeah, it's men on online
Yeah,
coaching, which is interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe it's the modality because you did mention that you used to not
Yeah.
like, yeah.
That just crossed my mind as well. There's so many factors, but totally resonate with what you say about how you are at that point in time attracting
Mm.
like different types of people.
Yeah. I hope that as I age, I will attract different people and interesting people the same. Yeah. And
Yeah.
likewise. Um, Speaking of online worlds, I think we're about done with the time and I'd love to go to bed soon
Mm.
and for you to get on with the day. But I would love to know where can everyone find you in your work? And I think that was a really lovely conversation and I'm sure people want to know more.
Yeah, thanks so much. Currently on social media, I'm just Soischi, Soisci. And my current website is humanpatterns.net. But in the new year, that's changing.
Dun, dun, dun. Cool. We look
Yes.
forward to seeing more about that. And where in Tasmania are you sharing right now?
I'm in Hobart.
Hobart. Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing here.
Yeah. From what I see, it looks it. I'm jealous. Yeah, I'm jealous. Anyway, Soichi, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Have a lovely Christmas and New Year. And thank you for connecting.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. And yeah, have a wonderful festive period as well.
And that's a wrap on yet another conversation. We're up to series 3, which is amazing. Thank you so much for listening, for engaging, and for supporting if you're a beloved patroon. If you're new here, I'd love to just give you a small insight into the inspiration behind the podcast. It's based upon a favourite metaphor of mine, and it goes something like this. There were 5 blind folk walking through a jungle. They come across an impassable object. The first one goes to the object, reaches, feels the leg and goes, it's a big strong tree. The next one comes to the object, feels the side and says, no, it feels more like a wall. The next one comes up, feels what he thinks is a large snake. The next one comes and says, no, I think it's more like a spear. After all 5 perspectives are taken in, they realize that actually the impassable object is an elephant. And to me, this is synonymous with allowing various perspectives to enliven or enlighten one specific topic. The idea, therefore, is we engage with 5 different people every series. We interview them on the same topic and we gain 5 unique insights into this topic. If you enjoyed this series, we also have some previous series. Series 1 was all around the idea of movement. Series 2 was all around the idea of injury. And we also have now what we call side notes, a short form version of our conversations that we share between the gaps in our series. As always, it really helps us if you like and share this with your friends and family. We're a self-funded project and we're slowly growing step by step. We'd love to continue these interesting conversations with these amazing individuals for you guys to listen to. So please share. Thank you so much from Will and Harvey. Keep figuring things out.